the lines that establish Panium as a waymark and see the history surrounding it. We'll be looking at the lines of the 144,000, Acts 27, Pyrrhus and World War II, and Pyrrhus and World War I. So we're not going to detail each history, but just focus on the waymark that parallels with 2021. So first, we'll look at the lines of the 144,000, the priests, Levites, and Nethinims. These lines show the experiences of the people who joined this movement. So at the top line of the 144,000, Panium is marked at the year 2021. In the priest line, 2021 is the fractal second advent. It is um, it is the close of probation for the Levites and the Sunday law for the Nethinims. Panium tells us the story of the defeat of the King of the South, or Russia. So the events of Panium only exist at this top line. In other words, since the priest line ended in 2021, we need to see Panium in the context of this top line, where Russia continues all the way to the Sunday law, as we will see in the lines of Acts 27. Acts 27 tells the story of two ships, the ship of Adramyttium and the ship of Alexandria. Both of these ships represent the institutions of the United States and Seventh-day Adventism. So the waymarks of Cyprus and Acts 27:27 parallels with 2021. In the top line, we see Cyprus representing the time period of the Midnight Cry, where a group of people are prepared to do God's work. We also see the beginning of the rise of the UN and this movement, and also the fall of the United States and SDA, as represented in the Sea of Cilicia and Pamphylia. And all of this leads us to the Sunday law. The bottom line, the sailors on the ship of Alexandria knew how far they were to land and to shipwreck by sounding the waters. And in application in 2021, our message of equality gets formalized in the message of radical feminism. Thus, we gain more light on what our Sunday law or shipwreck will be like. So these are the lines of Paris, World War II, and our line. Zooming in, we can see that 287, 75 BC, and 1945 line up with our waymark of Panium in 2021. In 287 BC, Pyrrhus joins the three allies, Seleucus, Ptolemy, and Lysimachus. But only Lysimachus showed up, and together he and Pyrrhus defeat Demetrius. Then they divide the territory of Demetrius in Macedonia between them. But Lysimachus uses propaganda and sanctions against Pyrrhus to gain all of Macedonia for himself. So there is this fight over spheres of influence. In 275 BC, the Battle of Beneventum takes place. Rome and Pyrrhus are fighting against each other this time. Pyrrhus uses his elephants again, but in this battle, the elephants turn and charge against his own army. So Pyrrhus is defeated by his own weapons. This is an important point that we'll expand later on. On this slide, the King of the North, or Rome, wins. In 1945, Russia joins the Allies, just like Pyrrhus joined the three allies of Seleucus, Ptolemy, and Lysimachus. Germany is defeated and divided between USA and the USSR, just like Demetrius's Macedonia was divided between Lysimachus and Pyrrhus in the top line. Again, a fight over spheres of influence. So the lines of Pyrrhus and World War I give us a few more insight into the events of 2021 that we'll not go into detail in this presentation. So the Nabateans represent Islam here at this flea mart, but that is another story. And the piece of the diners line up with Armistice Day that ended World War One. On these lines, the king of the north is Germany, and the king of the south is Russia. And here we can see in 1918, Germany surrenders, and that parallels with how Russia today lost at 2021. So the king of the north loses on the line of failure. Just like in these first and third lines, the king of the north lost, but on the second and fourth line, the king of the north wins. So our line is a line of success. So we're done with our review. Next, let's take a look at the timeline of what happened in Ukraine from 1989 to 2021. And we'll go through each year on this line. But before we do that, does anyone have questions on what we went over so far? Any clarification? Okay. So in 1989, the Soviet Union falls apart. As the economy is collapsing, the oligarchs buy up the wealth in Russia and Ukraine and become super rich, powerful, and corrupt. And in 1991, Ukraine votes to become independent from the Soviet Union. This year is also when the Soviet Union fully falls after receiving a deadly wound in 1989. In 1996, Ukraine ratifies its constitution, and this is the beginning of modern Ukraine. In 2010 to 2014, Viktor Yanukovych becomes president, and he is a Ukrainian oligarch, and he is really rich and corrupt. In 2014, the people are tired of Viktor and overthrow him in the 2014 Ukrainian Revolution, and Poroshenko is elected. He is pro-West but still an oligarch. So right before the 2019 election, several things happened that makes Putin mad at Ukraine. First, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church splits from the Russian Orthodox Church, and then Poroshenko amends the Ukrainian constitution to show that Ukraine wants to join EU and NATO. But in 2019, people don't want another oligarch. So they vote for Vladimir Zelensky. He ran on one promise to rid Ukraine of corruption. And Russia was kind of happy with Zelensky at first because he seems so inexperienced and easy to manipulate. Zelensky doesn't get much done in 2019 and 2021, and one of the reasons was because Trump was not very supportive of Ukraine. He was trying to make Zelensky investigate Biden's son. But if he did that, he would get into trouble with the next administration if Biden won. And this scandal is what caused Trump's first impeachment. Right, so now let's go to 2021. And we'll be drawing parallels from the Battle of Beneventum of 275 BC to see how the battle in 2021 Panium was fought out. So the king of the north in Beneventum was Rome, and the king of the north today is the United States. The king of the south in Beneventum was Paris. The king of the south right now is Russia. And the way the Battle of Panium is going to be fought is through information, just as the Battle of Beneventum was fought through elephant. The winner in both battles is the king of the north, Rome, and the United States. And I also want to make the point that other tests mentioned back in around 2020 that the Battle of Raphia in 2019 was the events of the whole year. So the events of the Battle of Panium will take up most of the year 2021 as well. So the January 6th riot is the major event that kicks off 2021. However, we won't go over what happened during this day since we are following the story of the King of the South. But this is when the 2020 election was certified and Biden came into power. So in the Battle of Beneventum, Rome, the king of the north, first pokes at Pyrrhus, the king of the south, and Pyrrhus just retaliates. So we will see US Drew Zelensky provoke Russia first in 2021, and then Russia fights back. So when Trump was president, Zelensky did not have much support from the US, so he did not do much to clean up corruption in the Ukraine. But when Biden was elected, the new administration began to pressure him to fulfill his campaign promises. So Zelensky goes to work in 2021.
Julia, could you repeat about Tara's story first? I sort of missed that.
So in the Battle of Beneventum, which lines up with Panium, the king of the north, pokes at Pyrrhus, the king of the south, and the king of the south, Pyrrhus, retaliates. So in 2021, in parallel, US, the king of the north, Drew Zelensky, provokes Russia, the king of the south, in first in 2021, and then the king of the south just retaliates again.
Okay, thank you.
Just a parallel. Okay. Any other questions?
Hi, Julia. This is Kathy.
Uh-huh. Hi, Kathy.
Can you remind me or us what Zelensky did to poke at the King of the South? I can't remember.
Yeah, we'll just go through it right now.
Oh, okay, sorry.
So in February, Zelensky starts by going after Viktor Medvedchuk. So this pro-Russian oligarch was very powerful and had his own TV channel and a political party called For Life. Zelensky puts sanctions on Medvedchuk, freezes his assets, and shuts down his 3 TV channels. So Medvedchuk didn't just have one TV channel, but 3. Of course, Putin does not like this because the TV channels are a way for him to communicate to Ukraine. So now we're going to read several quotes. Somebody can
Julia?
volunteer to read them. Yes?
Sorry, it's Alyssa. Just a quick question. I don't remember if you said it or not, but Medvedchuk was he a political figure or he was only one of the um, oligarchs that owned the media?
Yeah, I'm not sure if he had any position, but he was this powerful oligarch that was in Ukraine and he had 3 TV channels.
Okay. So I was thinking that, oh, that was Medvedev. Okay, never mind. I'm getting the names mixed up. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a lot of names. All right, so this quote is going to show how Medvedchuk is Putin's tool in Ukraine. Does anyone want to read this for me?
I'll read. He is Putin's asset inside Ukraine, said the head of the Ukraine Forum at Chatham House in London. He's like a magnet for all pro-Russian groups, for pro-Russian sentiment. Before they were taken off air, the TV stations under his control had for years aired narratives about almost the same as Russian state TV channels. Putin is presented as a hero. Russia is a friendly nation with which we need to have friendly ties. Our enemy is the West. Ukrainians are fascists, and this is not a real nation after all. Zelensky's administration and independent experts have pointed to evidence that the Kremlin, in effect, financed the broadcasting and political activities of Medvedchuk and his associates by granting them lucrative energy business interests in Russia. Zelensky's fight against Medvedchuk is a fight against Putin, said Hannah Hopko, chair of ANTS, Kiev-based national interest advocacy group.
Thanks, Linda. So this shows that Medvedchuk's TV stations under his control had for years aired narratives almost the same as Russian state TV channels. So we see that these TV channels are an important communication tool between Ukraine and Russia. So it is a major blow to Putin when Zelensky takes them down. And
Excuse me, Julia. Can you
Yes.
remind me what year you're bringing this part in on the line?
So all of these events are happening in 2021. So this is
Okay.
happening in February.
Okay. But he was in Putin's squad or whatever you want to say prior to this occurring. So right prior to Zelensky interfering with this.
I'm not
Medvedchuk.
sure about that. Yeah, I'm not sure about
Probably so, Susan.
That's
because,
what I
you
was
know,
thinking.
Mhm.
Yeah, but I just kind of wanted to place that in my mind as we go forward. Thank you.
So Biden becoming president, he asked Zelensky to clean up, the oligarchs. So that's when he takes, the beginning in February 2021 there. Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yes, we could always do some more research into this. I'm just reviewing Elder Tess's presentations. All right, so we went through January and February. Let's keep going through the year. So in March, Russia starts sending troops to the Ukrainian border. Would somebody else like to read this quote?
I'll read it
I
for you,
can.
Julia. First Russian troop buildup. In March and April 2021, Russian armed forces began massing thousands of personnel and military equipment near Russia's border with Ukraine and in Crimea, representing the largest mobilization since the annexation of Crimea in 2014. This precipitated an international crisis due to concerns over a potential invasion. Satellite imagery showed movements of armor, missiles, and heavy weaponry.
Thank you, Susan. And why is Putin sending troops? Because Zelensky, under pressure from the United States, started to tackle Medvedchuk, Putin's ally. And the King of the North pokes first at the King of the South. And Zelensky doesn't stop. In May, Ukrainian prosecutors tries to arrest Medvedchuk on the charges of treason. And then in June, Putin pulls back some of the troops, but he leaves the equipment and most of the troops at the Ukrainian border. In July, he issues an essay about how the Russian and the Ukrainian people are one and that there is no Ukrainian nation. Can somebody please read this quote?
One nation. In the essay, Putin argues that Russian and Ukrainian.
Francisco is speaking, but we can't hear him. I mean, I can tell he's back there, but
Julia, I'll read it for you.
Okay.
Could you hear me?
Yes, there's lots of quotes, so yes.
Okay.
A lot
All
of
right.
volume. Thank
Okay.
you.
In the essay, Putin argues that Russians and Ukrainians, along with Belarusians, are one people, belonging to what has historically been known as the Triune Russian nation. To support the claim, he describes in length his views on the history of Russia and Ukraine, concluding that Russians and Ukrainians share a common heritage and destiny. The essay denies the existence of Ukraine as an independent nation, noting the large number of ethnic Russians in Ukraine. Putin compares, quote, the formation of an ethnically pure Ukrainian state, aggressive towards Russia, end of quote, to a use of weapons of mass destruction against Russia.
Okay, so this is how Putin is going to justify his aggressive behavior toward Ukraine. So we are going to move on to October now. This is an important month because it is when the International Consortium of Journalists published the fact that they have the Pandora Papers, which is about 11.9 million documents. The ICIJ is an independent global network of 280 investigative journalists and over 100 media organizations spanning more than 100 countries and based in Washington, D.C. Might seem unrelated to the Battle of Panium at first, but we'll see that this is an important weapon for the King of the North. And would somebody like to read this quote?
I'll read it. This is Jackie. Hi, Julia.
Hi,
This
Jackie. Thank you.
You're welcome. This leak is really Panama Papers on steroids. This is the Pandora Papers because we think we are opening a box on a lot of things. These documents, for the very first time, showing the U.S. as a tax haven itself. We are talking about some of the most famous people in the world who are in these documents. Presidents, prime ministers, government ministers, the King of Jordan, a number of very high-profile Russian clients, people who are very close to Vladimir Putin. We're seeing them buying real estate. We are seeing them trading in shares using offshore companies. The biggest journalism partnership in history. We aren't looking at a couple of $1 million here. We are looking at trillions of dollars. Wow.
Thank you. And why are the Pandora Papers so significant? Because it is information on Putin's cronies and oligarchs. And this is the information that US will use to sanction the Russian oligarchs after the invasion of Ukraine. So here again, we see the use of information because that is how war is mainly played out in the 21st century. And an article gets published on October 11th showing the perspective that Russia has toward Ukraine. So does someone want to read this quote?
Russia's view of Ukraine.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. On 11 October 2021, Dmitry Medvedev, Deputy Chairman of the Security Council of Russia, published an article in Kommersant in which he argued that Ukraine was a vassal of the West and that therefore it was pointless for Russia to attempt to hold a dialogue with the Ukrainian authorities, whom he described as weak, ignorant, and unreliable. Medvedev concluded that Russia should do nothing in regard to Ukraine and wait until a Ukrainian government comes to power that is genuinely interested in improving relations with Russia, adding, quote, "Russia knows how to wait. We are patient people," end quote. The Kremlin later specified that Medvedev's article, quote, "runs in unison with Russia's view of the current Ukrainian government."
Thank you. Okay, now the information war is starting to ramp up, and the Russian narrative is that they won't attack Ukraine. But Biden has learned a thing or two from Obama's mistake when Russia invaded Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula in 2014. And Donna, would you like to read this quote?
Sure. The power of disinformation. When they last sat down for an interview in November of 2020, Barack Obama told Atlantic editor-in-chief Jeffrey Goldberg that disinformation is the single biggest threat to our democracy. The threat was not a new one, he said, but it was accelerating. It has continued to accelerate since. A month and a half after that conversation, a violent mob stormed the Capitol, driven by the false beliefs that the election had been stolen from Donald Trump and could be taken back by force. Over the past year, COVID conspiracisms has likely cost thousands of lives. Russia has mounted a massive disinformation campaign to justify its invasion of Ukraine.
So this shows the power of disinformation. Let's also read this quote. I think I skipped this. Any volunteers?
Julia, can I make a brief comment and you can correct me if I'm not remembering correctly? But Panium was also Beneventum, right?
Yes.
And wasn't Beneventum, I feel like Elder Tess mentioned that they had like witchcraft or something of that nature. So I was thinking about that with, the disinformation and the conspiracy theories and how in a way it's kind of like it poisons your mind and kind of like a witchcraft. I was kind of thinking about that with Beneventum and the characteristics of Beneventum, and then Panium and the Pandora papers. Because I remember way back when Jeff was an elder, and we don't use all that methodology anymore, but he did link Panium with all the like pandemonium, and it just made me remember that when the Pandora papers, and maybe that'll help the connection stay sealed in my memory, Panium and Pandora papers, because I kind of forgotten all those facts. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's the exact point. So the Battle of Panium and the Battle of Beneventum, what we are seeing is the battle of information, not the hot war, the bombs, not the drones, not the actual hot war that's going on, but the information surrounding it. And that's how the United States has won that battle. So thank you. So could I have someone read this quote?
I can. In the past, the United States had sat on its hands as Russia waged information war. Pardon me. In 2014, days before Russia invaded Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula, Russia released a recording of an apparent phone conversation between senior U.S. diplomat Victoria Nuland and the ambassador to Ukraine at the time, in which Nuland disparaged the European Union. The move was part of a wave of disinformation and propaganda from Moscow surrounding the seizure of Crimea. But the Obama administration didn't react. That's because the U.S. had opted out of the great power propaganda wars after the 9/11 attack. Weiner said. So what was the United States response to all of this? Weiner asked. Crickets. Nothing. Zip. They had no response.
Thank you, Carol. So Back in 2014, the United States did nothing to counter Russians' narrative because they were humiliated by what happened in Iraq back in the early 2000s. They had said there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, but there were none. So the CIA was humiliated and they did not want that happening again. So there was nothing to counteract Russia's war of disinformation. Just like in the line of Pyrrhus, at first Rome thought Pyrrhus was incompetent and was repeatedly taken by surprise because they couldn't protect themselves against his method of warfare, elephants. But we can now see how powerful disinformation can be, and Putin knew that and used it for years without any pushback from the United States. But in the Battle of Beneventum, elephants turned on Pyrrhus, and the Russian mode of information turns on them as Biden does something different. So, does someone want to read this quote for me?
I can read. Intelligence work happens in the shadows, but the Ukraine crisis is dragging it into the sunlight. One of the most remarkable aspects of this showdown has been President Joe Biden's willingness to publicly release sensitive information on Russia's plans before they can be put into action. These disclosures are part of a strategy to stay a step ahead of Russian President Vladimir Putin. They also represent a faster, more aggressive approach to waging the information wars of the 21st century.
Thank you. So Biden is predicting what Putin will do next, and that just spoils his plans. And notice that Biden is just using information to defeat Putin, no weapons at this point. And would someone like to read this quote?
I'll read. The U.S. victory. The result has been a remarkable 4 months of diplomacy, deterrence, and American-led information warfare, including the last-ditch effort to disrupt Mr. Putin's strategy by exposing it publicly. Unlike the withdrawal from Afghanistan last year, it was executed almost flawlessly. Even the Germans and other European nations highly dependent on Russian-supplied gas signed on to the playbook.
Thank you. So this article was written on February 24, 2022. And so we can see that the United States used information warfare starting from October 24th, the last 4 months. And this was also when the formalization happened. And Elder Tess presented radical feminism in the October 24th and 27 to 30 camp meetings. So this waymark connects neatly with our internal history. And then Ukraine strikes back at Russia on October 26th. Do I have another volunteer, please?
Sure, I'll go ahead and read. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Events of October 18 and October 26. On October 26th, Ukraine's military confirmed it had used a Turkish-made drone against a position in Donbass, the first time Kyiv had employed the technology in combat, prompting an outcry from Moscow. Relations between Moscow and NATO are especially tense. Russia suspended its mission to NATO in Brussels on October 18.
So we can see in October 18, Russia and NATO cutting off ties, and then October 26th, Russia strikes back. So we finished going over the year of 2021, and I just want to circle back and repeat some of the points that Elder Tess made throughout these three presentations. And one of them is about hot wars during an information war. Did Can I have a volunteer, please?
I'll read. They, the newspaper quotes, speak about the information war, about waging truth as a weapon, about a battle of ideas, a war of narratives, the information wars of the 21st century, about 4 months of American-led information warfare beginning in October of 2021, which they said was executed almost flawlessly. Intelligence has an instrument of state warfare, all to fight the disinformation weaponry of the Kremlin. Regardless of what looks hot in the current conflict, we have to go back to October, and even now, between superpowers, the base of this conflict is information. It is in the battle of ideas, the war of narratives, where we find the fulfillment of the battle of Beneventum, as Pyrrhus's favorite weapon turns on him. As the external, so the internal. On the other side of that curtain is the battle of ideas. If you are in this movement, there won't be peace this side of the second advent because it's the great controversy, the great war, the great political election. It is a battle of ideas, and you are part of the battle of ideas, choosing for yourself what ideas you accept or reject, and for good or for evil, influencing the ideas of others. There is no peace in an election campaign.
Thank you. So we can see an information war both in the church and in the world. And this information war started in heaven. Does someone else want to read this quote?
I can. The influence of mind on mind. Excuse me. The influence of mind on mind. Okay, maybe I can't read. So strong a power for good, when sanctified, is equally strong for an evil in the hands of those opposed to God. This power Satan uses in his work of instilling evil into the minds of the angels, and he made it appear that he was seeking the good of the universe. As the anointed cherub, Lucifer had been highly exalted. He was greatly loved by the heavenly beings, and his influence over them was strong. Many of them listened to his suggestions and believed his words. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not. Neither was their place found any more in heaven. 7 BC.
Thank you. So can everyone see the repeat and enlarge here? So Ellen White is describing how the battle was fought. It was the information war, the influence of mind on mind. And that was how the battle in heaven was fought out. And another point Elder Tess makes is that we can also see how gender connects to the battle of Panium. Obama did not confront Putin. Trump befriended him. Biden wasted time focusing on building a relationship with China. But who recognized Putin for what he was? Who did Putin especially not want to win in 2016? Someone read this quote for us?
Oh, I guess I'm too slow. I kind of wanted to just make a brief comment about the previous quote, but I was waiting for you to finish your points.
Yes. Is that what you want to say?
Thank you. So, I was thinking about this influence of mind on mind and how it was just, when you think of it, it was just Satan or Lucifer at first. And it was subtle at first, where now we're seeing the manifestation isn't so subtle, but it begins subtle to where you don't even maybe necessarily recognize that you're becoming ensnared. And it's usually, I would say probably maybe always starts with a minority, a very small minority. And that small minority begins to poison because and that minority grows, right? But I've even noticed that here personally, in an experience I'm going through now. It's a very small minority, but they're very loud, and they have the ability, just the way they carry themselves and the way they speak, to hush and silence the others because they have that, they're carrying that, people can feel it, and some will even leave to where it's just that minority that takes control. It's really interesting because I see that's how the influence also began, in heaven.
Yes, thank you. So it's an information war. It's not a hot war. Like it's something that is quite subtle and we can't see. And and another thing, like the Sunday law history, though, is the many that's going to fall, that's kind of the majority. So you also have to know what applications we're making. So
You mean the
yes,
many that will be overthrown? That's what you're
yes,
referring to, Julia? Yeah, and that's at the Sunday law.
yeah, we're the majority, or a lot of people follow it.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Susan. So anyone want to read this quote for us?
I can read. It's better not to argue with women, Putin told an interpreter, playing on a stereotype of women as irrational. We be creatures who presumably can't be trusted to handle complex things like diplomacy. But Miss Clinton has never been too graceful in her statements. Still, we always met afterwards and had cordial conversations at various international events. I think, even in the case, we could reach an agreement. When people push boundaries too far, it's not because they are strong, but because they are weak, he said. But maybe weakness is not the worst quality for a woman.
So even though Putin considered Hillary Clinton to be weak, he was afraid to have her as the leader of the free world. So he used all of his disinformation powers to keep her from winning in the 2016 election because she saw him for what he was and he knew it. She understood Putin, Obama, Trump, or Biden did not. And I think that this connects really nicely to the Vespers presentation. How other tests pointed out how Hillary Clinton should have won the 2016 election and that she was the solution to the problems America faces today. And so
Yes,
we,
and sorry,
yes,
go ahead.
please go ahead. Please go ahead. I was moving to another point.
Oh, okay. I apologize. I just want to, I'm slow sometimes and I just didn't want to pass the slide. So when he says when people push boundaries too far, it's not because they're strong, but because they're weak. And it's such hypocrisy because that's what he does.
Yeah.
He pushes people's boundaries too far, right? And he's telling on himself. It's not because he's strong. Really inside, he's weak,
Yeah, exactly.
you
So,
know?
yeah. Did you have anything more to say, Susan?
No, that was it. Thank you.
All right, that's a nice point. So we can see how the events of 2021 fulfilled what the lines predicted they will, the United States winning in the war of narratives. But the point of our message is not to predict future events and draw in other people with that ability. It is to cut out the sexism in our hearts. And I want to circle back to Elder Tess's opening comments in the first video of this two-part series. So why didn't we predict the invasion of Ukraine? Because that would not have helped us. That would not save us from our own sexism. It would have been a distraction. So here's a quote Elder Tess gave in the first video of this two-part series. She made the point that we need to accept the evidence that God gives to show us what is true, even if that makes us uncomfortable. So does somebody want, could I have 3 people read one paragraph each? And please correct the gender terms as you read them.
Okay, I'll do number 1. The Lord has seen our backslidings, and he has a controversy with his people. Their pride, their selfishness, their opening of the mind to doubt and unbelief are manifest in his sight and grieve his heart of love. Many gather darkness about their souls as a garment and virtually say, we want not a knowledge of the way of God. We choose our own way. These are the things that separate the soul from God. There is in the soul of man an obstacle which he holds there with stubborn persistency and which interposes between his soul and God. It is unbelief. God gives sufficient evidence, but man, with his unsanctified will, refuses to receive evidence unless it comes in his own way to favor his own ideas. With a spirit of bravado, he cries, quote, proof, proof, proof is what we want, and turns away from the evidence that God gives. He talks doubt, unbelief, sowing the seeds of evil, which will spring up and yield their harvest. He is separating his soul farther and farther from God. Review and Herald, December 23rd, 1890.
Thank you, Marcia. Could I have someone else read the second quote?
I'll read. And you know, these words, these quotes, even though we've read them before, they're becoming more and more true. I don't know. They just are so true. Is it proof that such people need? Is it evidence that is wanting? No. The parable of the rich person, and well, I can keep that in the same gender. The parable of the rich man and Lazarus is given to help all such souls who are turning away from positive evidence and crying, proof. The rich man asks that one might be sent from the dead to warn his brethren, lest they come to the place of torment. Abraham saith unto him, they have Moses and the prophets, let them hear them. And he said, nay, Father Abraham, but if one went unto them from the dead, they will repent. And he said unto him, if they hear not Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded, though one rose from the dead. Review and Herald. Thank you.
Thank you. Somebody to read the third paragraph, please.
I read it. Why is it that people do not believe upon sufficient evidence? Because they do not want to be convinced. They have no disposition to give up their own will for God's will. They are unwilling to acknowledge that they have cherished sinful unbelief in resisting the light that God has given them. They have been hunting for doubts, for pegs upon which to hang their unbelief. They have been ready to accept testimony which is weak and insufficient, testimony which God has not given them in their word, but which pleases them because it agrees with their ideas and is in harmony with their disposition and will. These souls are in for great peril if they will bow their proud will and put it on God's side of the question. If they will, with humble, contrite hearts, seek for the light, believing that there is a light for them, then they will see light, because the eye is single to discern the light which comes from God. They will acknowledge the evidence of divine authority. Spiritual truths will shine forth from the divine page, but the heart must be open for the reception of the light, for Satan is ever ready to obscure the precious truth which would make them wise unto salvation. If any do not receive it, it will forever remain a mystery of mysteries to them.
Thank you. So I think these are really nice quotes to show that God won't give us a prediction if it won't help us. And if people want to find something to reject this message, they will, because God won't give us all the evidence. They require us to use faith. And it can be easy to think that God could give us a sign or prediction to persuade everyone that our message is the truth, but God doesn't do that. And one other point, when did Russia invade Ukraine proper? When did Russia actually get into Ukraine? What date?
Was it February 24th, 2022?
Yes. So, but we marked 2021 as the Battle of Panium. So it's that information war that we mark instead of the actual hot war.
Just a question.
Yes.
So would that designate the end of Panium? I know there was a lot of questions about that when Panium actually ended.
Mm.
You know, when it, and what you just said, that Panium was all about information war, not hot war. But I guess the information war goes on, continues all the way through, right? But when hot war entered, that wasn't a characteristic of Panium, right?
Right. We are looking at the war of narratives that happened in 2021, not the actual hot war, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. But that's what made me wonder if that was the the closing of Panium. Anyway, I'll leave that alone.
We marked the King of the North, Biden winning Panium because he accurately predicted and knew what was happening in Russia. So he knew
Yes.
what they were going to do. So that is the winning part.
Yes.
Good
I've
points,
got that.
Susan. I can just parallel with the deadly wound to death. It's a progression with 1798 and 1989.
Thank you,
thing.
Gloria. Maybe that's what it is that I'm trying to articulate. You can, through seeing the change, the transition, right?
Yes, yeah, and it's a period of time that
Right.
happened. Yeah.
Thank you.
Right, great points. So let's also read what Elder Test says about not using evidence as the basis of our faith. Could I have a volunteer, please?
I'll read.
Thank you.
Why is visual evidence like predictions not our basis? Our faith is not in those types of evidence. God needs to show us where we are in history and help us prepare. But we need to not see these things as evidence that this is true. Adam and Eve walked with Christ, and when they had to vote for their choice of political party with nothing obscure or hidden behind a curtain, it did them no good. Ancient Israel walked over the Red Sea. After everything that happened in Egypt, did that do them any good? No. The evidence is in truth, and it is a legacy of the mistakes of the past that predictions are looked to as evidence.
So this is So even when all the miracles that Jesus did when he came to earth, that did not help persuade the Jews to believe that Jesus was the promised one. So we have to be humble and accept the evidence that God gives us, even though it's very subtle, it's just information work. All right, and that's all I have for today. So in summary, we did a little bit of review of the past lines in the beginning, and then we looked at the history of Ukraine from 1989 to 2021. And then we focused in more into the year 2021. And I'll just close in prayer right now and then open the floor for more comments and questions if you have any. Okay, if you kneel with me. Dear Lord, thank you for the evidence that you give. Help us to seek for them and learn them instead of waiting for the evidence that pleases. As we go through the week, be with each one of us and keep us safe and help us to learn more and more of this message. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. All right, thank you everyone.